Hey, I'm Kirk Harnack. On This Week in Radio Tech, we're talking about Hamvention in Dayton, but we're also figuring out how hooking up with amateur radio is good for a professional engineer's knowledge and career. Here we go.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This Week in Radio Tech, episode 83, recorded May 18th, 2011. Amateur radio for professional engineers. This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you by Telos Systems and the new HX1 and HX2 digital telephone hybrids on the web at telos-systems.com, and by Trim Tonic. Trim Tonic is a natural appetite suppressant tonic that takes the edge off being hungry. Go to trimtonic.com and use offer code TWIT for 20% off. Hello, it's time for This Week in Radio Tech. I'm so glad you could join us. My name is Kirk Harnack. I've been a disc jockey and an engineer, and now I work for the great folks at Telos and Omnia and Axia. I'm just really glad they keep me on their payroll. It's a pleasure working for them, especially in tough economic times. People still seem to want their stuff. So what have you tuned into? Well, you've you've tuned into the Twit Network, and you've downloaded and are listening to or watching the podcast where we talk about radio engineering, and that covers a whole big range of stuff. From microphones and turntables, even to CD players and automation systems, digital and analog audio transport and mixing and routing systems, and even ways to get the audio out to the transmitter site, and then how we actually transmit that from high atop a tower or a building to your radio or other listening device. And there's a lot of changes going on in that technology or in the way that broadcasters get that information out. That's the kind of stuff we talk about. So welcome in. Glad you're here. Stick around. You'll end up liking us, I hope. Hey, well, I'm the host, and today with me, our co-host is Chris Tarr from Muckwonago, Wisconsin. Hello, Chris.
Hi there, Kirk. I am the Director of Engineering for Intercom's radio stations in Madison, Wisconsin and Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I also am a co-founder of a website for engineering called broadcastengineering.info, kind of like a little SB engineering meeting on the web.
Cool. And that broadcastengineering.info, give us a little bit more insight about that, because I think that's something that engineers or people interested in broadcast engineering really ought to sign up in and go and look at from time to time. What do you guys do there?
Sure. Well, what it is really it kind of started as me and a good friend of mine, Kent, who's another broadcast engineer. We were looking around, and there really was no place online to speak of where people could just get together and exchange ideas, ask questions, get answers, and in kind of in the spirit of cooperation. There's some mailing lists, but those are kind of outdated, and those are real hard to kind of go back and look at things that may have been asked or answered before. They're not real searchable. So, it just kind of surprised me that nobody else is doing this. So a few years ago, we put this forum software online, and it really is. We've got several hundred members. Thousands and thousands of posts. I think we've crossed the 20,000 post mark, and there's something for everybody. We discuss AM radio, FM radio, digital. We have even just kind of a from the trenches thing where we can tell war stories, and we have a really good group of people online. They're very friendly, very helpful. We have some people who are interested in engineering, who have never done it before, but maybe are thinking about getting in. They come in and ask questions. They get answered right away. A great question from a couple weeks ago. Somebody was looking for a power supply for a certain console that's no longer made. They put out the call and we helped them out. So it really is. It's a good fellowship there and a lot of fun. And I suggest if you're at all interested in broadcast engineering, if you haven't signed up yet, to go to broadcastengineering.info and sign up and take part. If anything, it's a great resource. If you have you run into one of those unsolvable problems, chances are one of us there has run into it once before and can answer the question.
Chris, speaking of ways to get help, and since broadcast engineers often, well, a lot of us live a lonely life. We take care of several radio stations, oftentimes on our own with no one else on staff. Now, I know you have some staff there in a different city and maybe a little bit of local help, but so many engineers don't have that kind of interaction. So a forum like yours is can be a real lifesaver. You can get information. Maybe you need information about equipment that, hey, the company's out of business, or the manual is just not available anymore. Or maybe you just need a quick hint or help, in the middle of the night. So tell me how a lot of engineers subscribe to listserv. And I know that Barry Michigan, the eclectic engineer, runs several listservs. His place, Dave Biondi, another engineer, runs some listservs. And I subscribe to a few of each. I don't have time to read them all the time, but I usually try to check them out. So how is a listserv different from the kind of forum that you run?
Well, really, there's not a lot of difference, and I think they complement each other. I think the one issue that I have with listservs and why I didn't really participate in it is I get hundreds of emails a day. And like you said, a lot of times there's stuff in there that comes and goes, and I wouldn't pay attention. I just kind of skim it and delete it. And, the listserv software is very hard in terms of archiving. They archive them, but it's very hard to go back and kind of search through the entries, and makes it a little difficult to sort information. There's a great wealth of information out there, but it's not real searchable. And I found that was really frustrating for me when I had a specific problem and I couldn't find the answer searching for it. So what this does is it's kind of one central place broken down into, fairly distinct categories with, people who are, I kind of call them specialists in each category, who kind of, hang out in those special areas to answer those questions. And, we find that, that attracts people. And then as time goes on, we've built this great, it's a great searchable database. The longer we're online, the more valuable it becomes because it contains more and more information. So all you have to do is, log on, go to the website, open up a search box, type whatever it is you're looking for. And chances are it's been almost 5 years we've been online. There's a pretty good chance that somebody somewhere along the way has discussed it. So, they all have their places, and I know a lot of our members are also on those listservs, and, I think we all get along, and get together just fine. It's just another resource. But I just wanted something different that was a little easier, to search through and get information from.
Couple of comments about the differences you pointed out. One thing that I do to solve that email problem is that whether you're using like Gmail, you can use labels to automatically take the from address, who's sending it, and slip it into a label, and it never shows up in your inbox that way. It never bothers your inbox. It's always there in a label. You can go look at it when you have time to. But I use Outlook. I'm still using Outlook in Windows. I'm just really used to it. I'm really fast with it. But what I do is I just set up some rules in Outlook, and so anything from the alternate frequency list, or the broadcast list, or the tech advice list, tech assist list, other such lists, I just have them go into folders. And that way, when I do get to, sometimes I see the broadcast list up to 800 messages. Well, I either need to delete these, or I need to have a look at some of them, see if there's any interesting topics there. By the way, it'll build up to 800, 1,000 messages, over the course of a week and a half or so. And so doing that keeps them out of my inbox, and I can go deal with them. But the nice thing about a forum is that you've got the history all right there in the forum. Whereas with the listserv, if you're deleting things, you have to go back to your Gmail or someplace that might keep them forever to see them. So yeah, that makes the forum a good way. By the way, that forum, is it searchable by Google? If I did a
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, if you search for, certain keywords, will show up in the results. In fact, the specific post will. And I have it set up so that Google can crawl and do those searches for you, so that, you can use Google to do that. It's probably, so I mean, if you're doing and then actually that's how we get some of our members, is they've, searched for specific things, something related to a transmitter or something, and they were taken to our site. And they stopped by and they took a look around, and after that had registered. And some people prefer the mailing list, and there's really nothing wrong with them. I think again, my preference was always I'd rather have some sort of forum. I was just never a big fan of mailing lists, so that's really how that started. And like I said, we have members that are on both, and there's a list or two that I belong to as well. But I just was looking for one kind of a central repository. I just deal with that better. There's features on a message board, like just show me the new posts. You can follow only certain threads and be notified. And in fact, if you like seeing things in your email, you can subscribe to posts. And if there's a certain thread that you want to follow on the message board, you can subscribe to that and get emailed when people add and change things and get notified that way. So, you kind of have the best of both. If you prefer the forum, we've got that. If you like the email, you can set up your account to be emailed when people add information to the certain thread that you're subscribed to. So I just found it, the concept of the message board works better for me than the email threads. But there's a place for both. I really, like I said, I get a kick out of it because when I put it together, it was, again, my friend Kent and I kind of went, well, let's just see what happens. I didn't think anybody'd be all that interested. I was just kind of playing with the forum software. And I wanted to try it out. I have, hosting account, and I have plenty of bandwidth and everything. And it was more of a project for me to just set up a message board with a database. And I wanted to get a little experience with that. So it really started out as something fun. And I said, well, if people use it, great. And if not, I got the experience playing around with it, and that's great. And, like I said, it really took off. And what's kind of neat about it is the longer we're on, the more valuable it becomes because, it kind of starts to feed on itself and people find it. And, so it's been really great that way.
Cool. Well, broadcastengineering.info is that website. It is really useful. If you go to that broadcastengineering.info, you're presented not a bunch of gobbledygook to get to it. You're presented right away with the topics, and they're in topic sections like RF engineering, digital engineering, studio engineering, hobbyists, and miscellaneous, like From the Trenches or Ask the Engineers. Or even there's a virtual engineer wiki. I see that broadcast doc is posted in there sometimes. Is that you?
That's me. That is me. And by the way, if you do sign up, keep in mind because of spammers and things, that's the other thing we're firstly protective of. I pay all the hosting fees so that there's no advertising or anything. And we do a very good job. We have several moderators to kind of keep things clean and spam free. But because of that, we do have to approve all new members. And that's simply, I just verify that you're a human being. And as soon as I can do that, you get through. So when you register, unfortunately, you can browse, but you don't get access to post anything until I've approved you. And I usually, within a couple hours or so, I get an email and I'll go and activate your account. But we had for a while there had a problem with spammers, so we fixed that.
Yeah, when you sign up, expect a questionnaire from Chris about Ohm's law and
we were talking about
the theorem and things.
We were talking about for spam prevention, actually doing a question database where you had to answer something somewhat engineering related in order to activate yourself. But my concern was that we may have people who don't really know much about engineering who wouldn't get the question. So we'll just do it this way. They sign up and I'll just I'll get around to approving them, and then they can ask your question, and I do it pretty quickly, so it hasn't been too much of an issue.
Speaking of asking questions, find out if you're a human or if you're an engineer. One time, a corporate director of engineering told me that he had a singular question that he asked engineering applicants to his broadcast company. He asked the applicants to what impedance of a load would be the best choice to connect to the output of an FM transmitter with an output impedance of 50 ohms. And you'd be surprised at how many people don't know the answer to that question.
It's a trap. I always ask that of my prey. It's right. That's So we did try some Turing type of things to do the self-registration because there's we get a lot of people, and it can get crazy after a while. But that seemed to be the best way to do it. Is I could verify right away. I could tell by the email address and the IP address if you're a human or not. If there's any question, I just email and say, just checking to make sure you're actually a human being. Please let me know. But again, anybody who's listening or watching, stop by and check it out. Even if you don't want to register, that's fine. There's just some great information, and there's a good chance that if you get stuck on a problem, either we've answered it or we have somebody there who can. And we've got people who work at Nautel. We've got some pretty experienced contract engineers that are there. So in fact, we have one contract engineer who offers if there's somebody there who has a project, we'll offer discounted help for like AM arrays and things like that. So we have a really good group of people there.
Cool. Hey, Mr. Tobin, Chris Tobin's trying to join us, and he's having a little bandwidth issues, but he should be on. In the meantime, you're watching This Week in Radio Tech, or listening to it if you get it that way, and we certainly thank you for joining us. We're now a member. This podcast is now a member of the regular Twit family, so you can find our show posted at twit.tv/twert. Boy, is that a handful. twit.tv/TWIRT, twort. I'm still maintaining the thisweekinradiotech.com website, I guess for a little while longer, but to keep people, to keep the RSS feed going so that people who are subscribed to our podcast via iTunes can still be notified that way that there's new episodes available. But hey, check it out on the twit.tv website. You'll find a lot of other good things there too. Of course, if you're watching this, you probably already know that. So, Chris, I want to turn our attention to this this event of the year. If you are, it's certainly if you're a ham radio guy, but a lot of broadcast engineers go to this thing too. Why don't you tell us something about Hamvention?
Ground zero for geeks. Yes, it is fantastic. And somebody from the chat room earlier said, if you're going to talk about Hamvention, if you could give me an excuse to give to the boss to make it worthwhile for me to go, that'd be great. And I'm here to do that tonight. If you're a lot of broadcast engineers are amateur radio operators, and if they're not, they know people who are. And I recommend that if you are an amateur radio or if you are an engineer, that you consider getting an amateur radio license. Nowadays we don't have any code or anything to get in anymore to get the license. You have to have the engineering or the electrical knowledge and the knowledge of how amateur radio works to do it. But it is pretty easy to get, at least for an engineering type, pretty easy to get a ham license.
So here's if you look at here's some video from somebody promoting Hamvention. So just a lot of pictures from people there. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what I realize the pictures aren't up very long, but what can people expect to see when they go there? What are we looking at here?
What it is, there's two separate sections. There's an indoor section and an outdoor section. The indoor section is ham radio manufacturers, manufacturers of equipment for amateur radio, and it's like a big expo. It's kind of like CES for ham radio. You walk by and you can see the latest in technology. And believe me, again, for an engineer, there's a lot of technology out there. A lot of people think wrongly that that ham radio and amateur radio is kind of a historical thing. There's a lot of cutting edge things going on right now in amateur radio with digital modes and things like that. And what it is it's this big expo filled in the center of what's new and what's hot in amateur radio. Then there's a second part, which is outside on the lots, and those are the pictures you're seeing now. And that's an outdoor flea market. And you pretty much, if it's amateur radio, you'll find it at Dayton. Either somebody's selling it used, somebody's selling it new, But there's all these things going on in and outdoors, all revolving around amateur radio. And again, if you're a broadcast engineer, a lot of this stuff is stuff that you deal with on an almost daily basis with your job. So it really is a good way to kind of see not only what's new with amateur radio, but it very much ties in with the job that we do. And there's a lot of things that we can learn as engineers from amateur radio that they've been doing forever that, Bob Heil could apply. Yeah, there's Bob Heil. Exactly. He'll be there. I'm looking forward to hooking up with him while I'm there. But, as broadcast engineers, a lot of the things that amateur radio operators do, we are doing as well, or we should be doing, or, kind of ties into the work that we do. So I really think it's $22 to get in. I mean, the tickets are really inexpensive. It's a fundraiser for the amateur radio group in Dayton. It's certainly a lot less expensive to go to than Vegas to the NAB. Although obviously, the NAB is fantastic. But if you can't do that, you might want to consider making this, because there is a lot of technology and presentations and things like that although don't directly relate to broadcast engineering, are very similar in discipline. And I think it would be very worthwhile for anybody who's into engineering, or even interested in gadgets and computers and IT stuff. There's a lot of those types of things going on as well. It happens at the Hare Arena in Dayton, Ohio, and it was kind of funny. Somebody mentioned today, maybe I should petition the Hamvention folks to move it to like Vegas or something instead of Dayton, Ohio. They say, in fact, as a whole Detroit or something. And then I mentioned, just imagine all of these engineers in the pool. And that's all I had to say. And they realized Las Vegas is probably not a good idea. But it goes over 3 days, kicks off on Friday, goes through Sunday. I'm going to leave tomorrow and head out there. I'm looking forward to it. But aside from all of that, there's also, aside from what you can tell the boss with things like learning things about your job and similar disciplines. There's also a great camaraderie with other broadcast engineers, other hams. I mean, we're all, the one common thread in all this is we all love RF. We all love making radio waves in some form or another. And we're also going to get a collection of thousands of people who are interested in the same thing over the couple of days. It's just fantastic that way. And of course, the restaurants there love it too every year. Huge uptick in food sales in the Dayton area while we're there. But it's a fantastic program. It's a fantastic convention, and I try to get there every year to hang out with my friends and other broadcast engineers, because you'd be surprised how many of us, all of the ones here are amateur radio operators. So it's a great time, a lot of fun.
You've touched on a couple things that I think we ought to expound on, and
sure.
Probably the one reason that I studied enough to pass a simple test and got my amateur radio license, which is just a no-code technician, which I guess codes are not required anymore, so I'm a technician class, is that as a broadcast engineer, I felt that I was missing some insights into the technology that I was using, because in the manuals that are written for equipment that we use in broadcast engineering, and even things like antenna technology with like an ERI rototiller style FM antenna or a ring stub antenna, it was my imagination that these were the only ways to get RF signal out of a piece of coax and into the atmosphere, or an AM tower had to be a quarter wave tall, or maybe 5/8 of a wave tall, and that's pretty much the only way to do it. I knew there had to be other ways to do the things that we do in broadcast, and so my imagination of how some things worked was molded and shaped simply by the conventions that we have adopted as best practices in broadcasting. It turns out, for example, if you want to make an AM antenna, let's say your AM tower falls over in a windstorm, and you need to get back on the air. What else could you do? Do you have to wait for a tower crew to come build you a new quarter wave, half wave, 5/8 wave, vertical, Marconi radiator? Or could you do something else? And every ham radio operator who's, operated out of his house with a shortwave transmitter knows that, well, of course there's other things you can do. You can string a wire outside. You can make an inverted V. You can make a rhombic antenna.
And that's what I was going to say. I mean, these guys are fantastic resources for things like that. I mean, amateur radio operators, that's what they prepare for all the time. And they create their own antenna systems. And I found, I know a lot of amateur radio operators that are really smart guys who help me with antenna theory. I mean, they live and breathe antennas, and they're fantastic resources for that. And in fact, how I got my ham license was through a broadcast engineer. It was when I first got started in broadcast engineering. And the guy who was helping me out, my mentor, said, you should get a ham radio license. I think you'd really enjoy it. I'm like, I never really thought about it. Sounds like it's hard. He's like, I'll tell you what, this was like a Wednesday afternoon. He said, I bet you, I'll give you this book. I bet you, we're doing testing this weekend. I bet you could walk in and pass a test. He said, you're an engineer. You already know a lot of the theory. If you learn just the FCC specific things to amateur radio, so you could get your technician's test class license very easily. And I did. I walked in on that Saturday, took the test, passed, and I don't regret it a bit. I love it. And some of the things that I've done with packet radio, with automatic positioning, digital modes, we've done things like Fox hunts where you try to find the hidden transmitter. That's great for, tracking down interference. That's a skill that I still use trying to find, pirate stations and sources of interference. My first experience tracking down signals was what we call fox hunting, where somebody hid themselves with a transmitter, and this was down in Illinois. It was a county-wide type of deal in Kankakee County, where we'd have somebody hide somewhere in the county, and every couple of minutes key up and say something on the microphone and then go away. And with those little snippets, we had to track down and triangulate and find out where they were. That was really invaluable to skills that I still learn today, or I use today. So there's a whole lot involved with that, and the people involved can really be helpful, and the skills that you learn can really be helpful in your everyday job. So if somebody who was asking before about why you should be able to convince your boss to go to Dayton, that's one of the reasons. I can't express enough how ham radio operators are very practical people, and there's a lot of things that you can learn from somebody who's big into amateur radio.
You mentioned about this Fox Hunt thing. I've never participated in one, but I always read the articles in QST magazine and other places about how fox hunting works and how to build directional antennas.
It's a blast! It's a blast.
Yeah, I'm always interested in how you de-ambiguate. Is that the right word? If you've got an antenna that's like a loop, how do you tell which is it coming from, that direction or that direction? Well, one answer is you move a little ways and you try it again, and then you triangulate.
Right. And we use very directional antennas with step attenuators, so you can really attenuate the antenna and really focus it in and peak it and get an exact direction from where they're coming from. And it's a whole lot of fun. I really enjoy doing that.
If a half dozen ham operators on a fox hunt can find a guy who's transmitting for a few seconds every 2 minutes, why can't the FCC find the full-time, full-power pirates in Miami?
Well, I don't think they find it nearly as fun as we do. I think it's probably
that's true. For them, it's a job. Hey, I understand Chris Tobin is joining us. Let's see if Chris's connection is working. Hello, Chris.
Nope, we lost him again. I just saw the message.
Yeah, lost him again. Oh well, we'll continue on. I wish him luck. So the other thing that I wanted to bring up something that Bob Holowenko in the chat room said. He said a certificate of proficiency in amateur radio on my resume, this is Bob talking, is how I got my radio job. My employer recognized that ham radio geeks like technology and make awesome employees oftentimes, and it sure helps them understand data communications. So, boy, that can do a lot of good. Somebody recognizes that this is a valuable thing to be interested in.
In fact, the guy that I hired to help me out in engineering in Madison, one of the reasons I hired him was, he didn't have a ton of experience, but he had an amateur radio license. So I knew that he at least got it. He understood the principles of RF and how transmitters work. And I think he's right. I mean, it's a good sign of proficiency. If you've gotten that far, there's a lot of basics that you already know, and that kind of assures that. So yeah, it's great just for that as a career thing for your resume.
Well, there was Mr. Tobin for a second. Were we being teased? Ah, darn, we're being teased. Oh, well, you think in New York City you could get some connectivity. Maybe it's the iPhone problem. In New York City you can hardly get an iPhone to keep a connection. But I'm sure in Mukwonago iPhones work just great, don't they?
Well, they've got 4 people that have them. So what do you expect? I remember, true story. This is a true story. This was, I think, probably 3 years ago. I was still on a Nextel phone, and I was having some issues with data, and I got onto like a tier 3 technician, and who could actually see the cell activity and the tower activity. And he was, doing some stuff on his computer, and he said, so you must have a really good connection there. And I kind of laughed. He goes, yeah, you're the only one on the tower right now.
Yeah. So
here are the booties. That's the way it works.
Hey, we're going to take a break here for a moment, and it's time for commercial slot number 1. Our show is made possible and sponsored by, and we actually end up getting paid $1 or $2 for all of our time we put into this, and so I appreciate very much the relationships that we have with advertisers. But this stuff on the internet, hey, it's free for you to watch, right? And that on the Twit Network, there's an incredible amount of good, positive information that's useful every day, and hopefully this is part of it if we're filling your niche. Well, our show today is brought to you in part by a product called Trim Tonic. Trim Tonic is a natural appetite suppressant tonic. It takes the edge off of being hungry. Well, that sounds good, because that's usually, what do I have? I'm not drinking Trim Tonic, and I got 2 cookies here. I'm working on them pretty slowly. It has no stimulants in it, so it doesn't have any caffeine and no hoodia. Instead, Trim Tonic uses 8 active ingredients, some of which have clinical studies that actually do demonstrate their ability to curb appetite and reduce body fat. Well, I'm interested in that. I could stand to lose 20, 30 pounds right away. I found, in fact, I was looking through, one of my daughters was here at the house earlier this week, or last weekend, I should say, and we were going through some old pictures that we're going to have digitized and scanned, and we found, I'll show you this for a second. Okay, we found an old picture of Kirk Harnack. This must be 35 pounds ago. I'm thinking, dang, that's some, I should get back to that. Okay, I really should. And so a product like Trim Tonic can help you do that by curbing your appetite, not making you want to eat so much. It has 3 main ingredients that work to help you not be as hungry. I'm going to see if I can pronounce these correctly. There's Acaranthus aspera, and this is a tropical plant used for centuries by tribal folks to curb their appetites. And for Trim Tonic, they use an expensive extract called Aid Slim, which it's the trademark name, has a couple of studies on weight loss that do work, and you can see the website about that. There's another product, another ingredient that is pronounced Ervingia gabanesis. And this is a seed extract from an African tree, also known as wild mango. They want to have such a complicated name for it if it's wild mango. The seeds have reputable studies that show its effectiveness with weight loss. The subjects saw a drop in both LDL cholesterol and body fat. If you want to check this out, and I really think you should, go to the website, Trim Tonic, and it's spelled, kind of specially here. Trim, and then tonic is TONIQ. TrimTonic.com for more information. Enter the coupon code TWIT for a 20% discount. Hey, that's like buying 4 and getting the 5th one free, right? So check it out, Trim Tonic. They are a sponsor. I know the folks at the Twit Network have checked them out and vetted them. And they have another product called Brain Tonic that we're going to talk about, I'm sure, on some other shows. But Trim Tonic, natural appetite suppressant. By the way, I was speaking of appetite suppressing and just eating a little bit less. Starvation diets don't work. The body just doesn't react well to those kind of things. But a good friend of mine, in fact, he's a colleague at the TV station here in Nashville, Fox 17, the case I do weather at. We noticed that he had lost about 20 pounds. And we asked, Nick, how did you do that? Are you working out? He said, well, I am working out a little bit, but honestly, I just smaller portions. Smaller portions. I just made myself eat, 20, 30% less at each meal. Didn't go for seconds. And it surely did work for him. He's looking good. And I know the Trim Tonic can help you, too, to curb your appetite. Trim Tonic, TONIQ.com, and the coupon code TWIT. All right. Moving on. We were talking about being a ham radio operator, getting into that hobby or pastime. And Chris, I had mentioned that, first of all, that there are things in broadcast engineering that I felt I didn't understand well enough. And if I would get into ham radio, that I would look at the same subjects from different approaches. Oftentimes, ham radio operators have to, because it's just you, it's just me, it's just one person spending money to have a radio station of sorts, having a ham station. And so basically ham operators need to do things cheap. Some ham gear is quite expensive, but some things can be very inexpensive, especially if you're willing to do a few things yourself. So since ham operators often need and want to do things on the cheap, we really get to learn the essentials of what goes into creating a signal or amplifying a signal or addressing the audio in a certain way, or then in digital modes, how we can use something as simple as a $10 PC sound card and some software to analyze the packet radio and different digital modes. Chris, why don't you give me your thoughts on this subject of we got to do things cheap, so we really need to boil it down to its bare essentials.
Oh, that's what's so elegant, in amateur radio operators. That's one of the things, kind of the unwritten rule of the road. I mean, one of the big reasons for us being is for emergency communication. We need to be able to set up and do things in times of disaster where you're not going to have that infrastructure there. You have to put something together. We practice that with something we call Field Day every year, sponsored by ARL, the American, I don't remember what ARL stands for anymore. Radio Relay
American League. Radio Relay League. I
had kind of cramped on that for a moment. But every year, that's one of the things you get together and you basically get points, and it's a lot of fun. You're setting up essentially a radio station in the middle of nowhere, sometimes without power, sometimes without any kind of infrastructure, and you have to be creative. And so, I mean, that's one of the things that we really try to do is, again, helping after Hurricane Katrina, even helping now with the floods. After natural disasters, usually the first forms of communication that come out of those areas is amateur radio, because over time we've learned the skills to just, how do we get anything to radiate, even if it's not something specific. Maybe it's not an exact cut antenna, maybe it's just a random wire. How do we load that up? How much power can we put into it before there's a problem? these are all things we learn. And because of that, it makes us frugal because we can. We don't have to spend thousands of dollars on an antenna system. We can run over to Home Depot, buy some pipe, and assemble something that'll work and radiate and work very well. And sometimes that's all we've got. And that's why we need to know how to do that. So I think one of the great things about amateur radio as it pertains to broadcast engineering is it forces us to think outside the box. We don't always have these huge budgets for things. And a great example of where my amateur radio background came into play, we were trying to devise an IFB system for a broadcast that we were doing from Fairgrounds, where we wanted to get audio back and forth from the studio through a channel. Well, we had a free RPU channel, and we set up kind of a two-way system to work on it, and it worked fantastically. But it was using ideas from a repeater system, that kind of thinking, amateur radio repeater system. So I think in terms of broadcast engineering, that experience gives us the ability to think outside the box sometimes, and especially when all of a sudden things go bad really quickly and we have to put something together. I had a transmitter go down, an AM transmitter, and I was trying to think of, okay, what if I can't get anything back on? I'm like, well, if I could create something even with a amateur radio and change the tuning on it and get 100 watts out of it on a frequency, on an AM frequency, and keep the bandwidth down, maybe I could put something on the air. You start to think outside of the box a little bit more because these are all things that we've done as our hobby. And now we can, we have that experience and that history to apply to our everyday job. So that's one of the great things about it. And somebody mentioned here on the IRC channel that it's not being cheap, it's being frugal. And that's absolutely true. But I think a lot of it is because that's the challenge. I don't necessarily know that it's always because we don't like to spend money, but I think it has to do with the challenge. Can I build this? Can I make it, radiate power? Can I make this thing light up? I think there's a lot of that goes on, and that's part of the fun. Oh, I can't hear Kirk. Kirk disappeared. Oh, Kirk's audio disappeared. Okay. We'll just look at his shining face. I see. Mr. Tobin is back. Are you there, Chris? Hey, all right, you made it.
Yes, I did. I'm not sure what happened to my broadband connection, but it went berserk.
The strangest thing.
Go ahead.
I just said it sounds like the same thing just happened to Kirk.
Well, I did several speed tests to different parts of the country, and anything west of Chicago doesn't seem to work very well. My ping test is about 300 milliseconds. Everything east of Chicago is 76, 56, 34 milliseconds. So I'm going to assume there's a problem with the broadband network I'm connected to.
Well, we were just talking about we were just talking about amateur radio technology. Maybe we just need to set up something on HF and just get you through with ham radio, get across the country that way.
Well, there you go. Like the some of the old military HF nets that they're out there. I think sometimes they turn on from time to time. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, we need more competition. We need more competition in that broadband arena. I don't like the idea of
well, I don't know that we'd call that broadband, but I think you're right. We were just talking about that, actually, how in times of emergency when infrastructure fails, oftentimes it's the ham radio operators that we hear first, and this is a great example of that. Hey, we could get you on on HF radio and get you just fine even when the internet's not working. So that's one of the great things about it.
That's true. Well, yeah, it's funny. You were talking about emergency situations and communications, and amateur operators do step up to the plate. And here in New York City Metro, I cannot tell you how many times on many occasions when I won't say disaster, but bad things have happened. First thing I turn on, I have several different channels I tune into, and those repeaters are active and people are running about. And matter of fact, when we had the big blackout in, was it 2006 or 2003? The only thing I was able to communicate with friends of mine on was 3 of the amateur repeaters I maintain and the backup systems we have on it from generators. So there is something to be said for that.
Oh, exactly, and we were talking about with how amateur radio kind of ties in with broadcast engineering. That's one of those reasons. That's one of those situations that comes up where, especially with with broadcast stations, I know one of the experiences I had with amateur radio and broadcast stations was with emergency management. And we, in fact, put in a link receiver so we could hear what's going on in the studios. And one of the things that kind of got me into getting the amateur radio license was working with the emergency management department for Y2K stuff. So it's really kind of interesting how that all ties together. And, again, when somebody was mentioning, how do I convince my boss to let me take time off for Dayton? It's all of those things. I mean, there's such a tie where, these two disciplines really mesh together well. And, there's a lot of things that you can learn from one or the other. So it's really kind of fun that way. Yeah. So let's see. Do we have Kirk back yet?
Might be. Hello.
There you go. Hey. I think we need just some. I think we need ham radio for this tonight. Is really what I'm gathering.
It might be. I had forgotten to hook up my computer in such a way that packet prioritization was occurring in the router. So, hey, I don't know if nobody else should be in the house right now, but if somebody is and watching a movie or uploading something, then that might do it. But hey, in fact, this would be a subject we should talk about: is packet prioritization.
Oh.
Hey, Chris, how you doing? Because in router, is hearing me okay?
Yes.
We got a huge delay now.
I think Waguanago is the only city on the planet right now that's connected pretty well to the net. It sounds like.
It does. All right. Well, let's soldier on and see how good or bad it does. Maybe we'll read tomorrow morning or read on the interwebs tonight that there was somebody cut a cable, in Dubuque, and all the traffic ended up getting routed through I don't know, the RIM servers in Canada.
Yeah, there you go.
One time I was connected and doing a trace route. It should have just gone across the state of Tennessee, and I ended up getting routed through Sao Paulo, Brazil. What? Really? Was that the least cost routing?
So somebody just mentioned on the IRC, Netflix is stealing all the bandwidth this evening.
Could be. So back to Hamvention and the way the other big thing I wanted to mention is that not only as a broadcast engineer can you learn to look at things from a different perspective and maybe begin to understand how a circuit works, not only the way that you learned as a broadcast engineer, or you learned by reading a manual for a transmitter or an antenna or some audio circuit. The other part of this is that amateur radio includes so many different disciplines, so many different parts of the technology of communication wire that you can spend amateur radio hobby, your career, whatever, just in learning about APRS and getting really good at that, or some other kind of packet radio where you're communicating across oceans and across continents with very low power and signals that are barely discernible from the noise. Certainly you wouldn't be able to understand an analog conversation. You might be able to pick out a CQ, a CW conversation with Morse code, but these digital forms of communication can just pick out signals out of seemingly almost nothing and give you text or whatever data that it is that you're transferring. That you're with the packet. Let's tell us you learning and what's surprised you about this.
You're kind of breaking up a little bit here. I think I got what you were trying to say. There are many different things you could do, and it's hard to pick just one. And that's one of the great things about it is you can pick one if you want, or there's many different things you can do. I'm very interested in APRS, for example. I have APRS running all the time when I'm driving around, or for the most part. I will be interested to see how that performs in Dayton. But, people log on all the time and see where I'm at and where I'm driving and that kind of thing. I'm very interested in that. I also, again, I have a repeater here in the Milwaukee area that we have. I've got a repeater in the Madison area as well. And, I'm not too much into HF. I'm a little bit. but even then, I've done some digital things, PSK, things like that, that I'm very interested in. And, that's great. If those are things that you want to get involved in, there's plenty to learn. And I still am learning things about that. And, if I lose interest in that, there's always voice communication. There's always CW. There's all these different things going on. And all of them are still evolving. And that's one of the great parts about it is amateur radio, unlike our job, it's kind of the spirit of using your imagination, creating and experimenting and trying different things, trying to soup up wireless gear up in the higher amateur frequencies, those sorts of things. So there's a lot of encouragement there to just try new things. And, you're limited to your mind and the skills that you have. And, if you want to put something together that runs on HF that nobody's ever done before, knock your stuff out, try it out, see how it works. And, some of the things that amateur radio operators have done in the past have gone on to become mainstream types of technologies. Things like, Wi-Fi, other types of communication like that. I mean, 2 meter repeater systems really were kind of highly developed by amateur radio operators. So, there's all these different types of things that just in the spirit of invention that amateur radio operators have done and created and have refined. So those are kind of things that a lot of times you don't get to do in your daytime, in your day job.
Chris, one of the things that captures my imagination, one of the facets of amateur radio, a competing thing called Echolink. I think is it Echolink? Internet Relay Linking Project, where usually it's 2 meter repeaters, usually at high locations in towns or out in the country, are linked to each other around the world via the internet. And the audio quality is just fine for amateur radio. And here I can be driving around. I can go be picking up my daughter at school in the afternoon and key up and dial in to talk to somebody in Brisbane, Australia, where they're just getting up and going to work in the morning. That captures my imagination, being able to talk around the world without all the muss and fuss of a big antenna outside and depending on skip to do that. So this is what entices me. What about you? Is IRLP interesting to you?
Sure. Well, there's Echolink, which you mentioned, and IRLP, which is the Internet Repeater Linking Project. IRLP is RF on either end with the internet in between. Then there's something called Echolink, which is for licensed amateurs, which is computer. You can do computer to computer voice over IP, but really it's computer to repeater. So one end is computer, the far end is RF. And what's kind of neat about that is I've got an IRLP app on my Android phone, and I can actually go and talk on a 2 meter repeater or 440 megahertz repeater with my Android phone, which is great for when my friends are back around the repeater. I'm in Dayton, for example. So yeah, I do some stuff with IRLP. I do some stuff with Echolink. We've set up a couple of nodes. And again, that's where there's something for everybody. If you're into IT type of things, computer things, people always joke, amateur radio, it's yesterday's technology. Sit down with a Linux box and configure an Echolink or an IRLP node. It's fascinating stuff.
It's a good idea. Then there's this other aspect of amateur that I've never gotten into, but it's always also captured my imagination, and that's these satellite flyovers. How you can communicate with another amateur with just a handheld radio and a handheld antenna that usually has 2 antennas built into it on 2 different frequency bands. And if you know where the satellite is, you can track it. You track it by listening when you're receiving, and you can talk to somebody else who is also in view of that satellite. So it's a simple repeater. Then there are satellites that carry packet information or packet messages around the world. Can you talk to us for a minute about that? Chris Tobin's back online. Chris, Tobin, have you ever dealt with either IRLP or any of the satellite stuff?
I've dealt with IRLP and Echolink. I like the idea of having the internet between the 2 RF sections. That's a lot of fun. The satellite I did a couple of years ago, that's wild. That's when you're able to make that work. Just the thought process of what you're doing, how you're doing it, and it's good. And what I love about all that stuff is just experimenting. The experimentation part of the process is what really helps you to open your mind. Like Chris was saying earlier, use some of the ideas and techniques that you develop and learn or fail at in amateur radio, and you can actually apply it in our business and broadcast and find a happy medium, and it works. And it's a lot of fun. But IRLP is definitely a fun operation. And actually, I should say so is Echo. Did I cut out? You guys lose me?
No, I got you. I don't know. Is Kirk still with us, or is he gone?
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, actually, well, I am sort of.
I got you a little bit there. Are you still there,
So,
Kirk? Or are you gone?
Oh, go ahead.
I
Kirk, I'm
think
calling you back.
Okay, bye.
Alrighty then.
Well, anyway, as we were saying, boy, we talk about problems with the internet tonight. There's a lot of those things that I've learned over the years, from just experimenting, and that's one of the great things with amateur radio is if you try and experiment and you fail, hopefully nobody dies, but it's not, it doesn't affect your everyday business. And so you're kind of encouraged to do those things. And not only that, but the way that the licensing works and the way that the FCC is allocated, it's encouraged. You really, essentially they say outside of a few reservations for things like Morse code, essentially the band is there to try what you want to try outside of a few restrictions. So you get these different frequency bands, all of which have all these different characteristics, and here you go. Take it, use it, try to figure out a way to make it work. And there's really no rule as to how you have to or not have to use it. So there's a lot of good ways to experiment there.
All right,
Absolutely.
maybe I'm back.
Yeah, here in the New York City Metro, there's a lot. Oh, is that Kirk?
Yeah, go ahead, Chris Tobin.
Oh, I was just saying that here in the New York Metro, we have a lot of networks or nets doing IRLP, Echolink, and a lot of the 10 gig, even the ATV, the slow scan and high speed amateur TV. I mean, it's amazing the amount of stuff that's going on, and it's a lot of fun checking it out. But learning from it, using it, experimenting, and you're right, if you fail, hopefully nobody gets hurt. It actually takes you much farther along in the craft, and that's what I enjoy about it.
We were talking about the different disciplines that exist within at the amateur tricks. If you're interested in talking about to other parts of the world, you're going to have to be interested in how the atmosphere plays upon shortwave radio signals, and when's a good time to bounce a shortwave radio signal off not a good idea to do that, or when is it not going to work for you. All different modes of propagation, different ways that radio signal off of your antenna at some angle toward the horizon and then bounce off a part of the atmosphere, like the ionosphere, one of the layers, and then bounce back toward the Earth. Is it going to hit the right place? Are you going to be able to talk to somebody in the UK versus talk? Makes a difference there. So learning about these atmospherics, and there's computer programs that can make this easy and help you understand what's going on too. Our show is brought to you in part by Telos Systems. Now, they're my employer, so hey, who better to ask about Telos gear than me, than Kirk Harnack, right? I want to tell you about an inexpensive product that Telos makes. It's the Telos HX1 and the new Telos HX2 telephone hybrids. Hey, I was just at a radio station in a major market, a news talk station, where I saw with my own eyes 20 of these things installed at reporters' workstations. They're using Telos HX hybrids to record what we used to call, maybe they still call them, actualities. That is the voice of someone on the other end of the phone line telling you about the fire or the robbery or the town hall meeting last night or the ball game. We use a telephone hybrid to extract the caller's voice in the highest possible quality from a phone line. Now, Telos for years has made the Telos 1, and we used to make the Telos 100 Delta, and we've made some other telephone hybrids. But now we've put all of our energy into making the Telos HX1 and the dual hybrid, the HX2. These are really high-performance hybrids at a very, very affordable price. Some of the features, well, they have separate send level and receive level metering right on the front of the box. Status symbols make life easier for producers engineers and talent with their animated high-contrast icon display that tell you, is the line on hold? Is the line there at all? Is the line in use? You can place the caller on hold via a front panel button. There's an auto answer built into the HX1. It's no longer an add-on separate. Auto answer is built in, so you can use it as an IFB hybrid for incoming reporters' calls, for example, to connect them to the intercom system. You can also select the ring count on the auto answer. It has worldwide disconnect signal detection. Now, that's pretty important. We use a chip in this HX1 and HX2 that is programmable for phone systems all around the world. So auto disconnect is actually kind of important, and it's kind of hard to do, too. There's input and output via XLR connectors for analog audio and optional AES-3 for the HX2. And there's input switching between mic or line levels. That's significant. You can use the HX1 or HX2 with just a microphone. It's got its own built-in mic preamp. Plus an internal universal power supply used on any voltage in the world, and our best, most advanced hybrid algorithms. Check it out for yourself on the web at telos-systems.com/HX. And I truly thank Telos for sponsoring this show and being such a world leader in telephone hybrid technology. The guys who invented the digital telephone hybrid. And thank him very much. Well, you may have noticed we had a lot of technical difficulties with this show. I got to looking at the internet traffic report, and turns out there were problems on the internet on Wednesday when we were doing the show. It wasn't our fault, really. Petaluma was fine, Nashville was fine, New York was fine with our local connections, but things had a hard time getting between all of our sites. So we hope you enjoyed the part of the show that we did. We sure enjoyed doing it for you, and we didn't want it to go to waste. So that's why we give you this slightly shorter show of This Week in Radio Tech about Hamvention and how being a ham radio operator can enhance your professional engineering career. Hey, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week on This Week in Radio Tech. Bye-bye.